ladies and gentlemen. I'm Shalomi Lane again. I'm going to be the host for this evening. It's my privilege to welcome all of you to this discussion organized by Verité Research together with the delegation of the European Union to Sri Lanka and the Maldives in partnership with the Lakshman Kadiragam Institute of International Relations and Strategic Studies. At the outset, I would like to warmly welcome our chief guest, Honorable Chathuranga Abeysinghe, Deputy Minister of Industry and the Entrepreneurship Development, Her Excellency Carmen Moreno, Ambassador of the European Union to Sri Lanka and the Maldives, the Excellencies, Ambassadors, the High Commissioners present here today, whose presence underscores the importance of international partnership in advancing Sri Lanka's investment agenda. And of course, the esteemed leaders from the private sector whose investment decisions and on-the-ground experience are central to the conversation that we are going to have today. Distinguished researchers, policymakers who play a crucial role in shaping evidence-based strategies for sustainable growth. Last, not least, all our honored guests, participants, thank you for being with us today. So before we start our conversation, can I please request all of us to switch off our mobile devices or to set it to silent mode to ensure there is no uninterrupted discussion. Additionally, we're going to have a Q&A session. You will see a QR code on the screen. You can scan it and give any questions that you may have throughout the conversation. Sri Lanka's economic recovery is entering a critical phase. While macroeconomic stabilization has progressed under the IMF Extended Fund Facility, long-term growth prospects remain constrained by the limited fiscal space, high public debt, and restricted room for public capital expenditure. In this context, private investments, specifically foreign direct investment, will be essential to sustaining recovery and supporting inclusive growth. Yet, Sri Lanka's FDI inflows have remained persistently low compared to peer economies in South and Southeast Asia, even during periods of regional investment expansion. Today's discussion, we will examine how Sri Lanka can position itself as a trusted, credible, and a resilient investment destination in this rapidly shifting global environment, and how it can convert into a growing investor interest in the region into committed, long-term, and high-value investment. To set the tone for this discussion, I now invite our chief guest to deliver the keynote address. Honorable Chathuranga Abeysinghe serves as the Deputy Minister of Industry and Entrepreneurship Development in the Government of Sri Lanka. He was elected to the Parliament in 2024, representing Colombo district from Kotte. He holds a Bachelor's of Science in Finance from the University of Sri Javardhanapura and is a fellow member of the Chartered Institute of Management Accounts. With over 16 years of professional experience, Mr. Chathuranga has gained diverse expertise in finance, HR analytics, data science, digital transformation. He's also an advocate for data-driven decision-making in entrepreneurship driving industrial transformation in Sri Lanka. Please join me in welcoming Honorable Chathuranga Abeysinghe, Deputy Minister of Industry and Entrepreneurship Development.
So first of all, I would like to thank Verité Research and Kadiragam Institute for inviting me for this very important session. Her Excellency Ambassador Carmen Moreno and rest of the delegations, the ambassadors and business leaders who are here, Governor of the Western Province. So I would, the topic that is given to me from growth, from recovery to growth. I think this is the topic that we've been talking. So the ministry that I became part of is the center in driving all this change. Because if we talk about growth and exports, the goal is with our ministry, but work is with rest of the ministries. That is how tough our life is, right? So we are the smallest ministry in the government with only 13 billion as our budget, only a capital budget of about 4 billion compared to 4.9 trillion we spend on a year. So it was quite a challenging task. So since we took in, from changing from processors to people to strategy to policy, so we thought of changing our name from Ministry of Industries to Ministry of Change. And this is the book that you will see after 5 years of my tenure. So this is a trajectory that we want to move into. We are looking at a pivot. So that means exponential growth from where we came from all these years. So whatever we have done for thus far has not given us this pivot in our economy. If you compare to Vietnam or South Korea, how they pivoted. Now Sri Lanka is having an ambitious goal with the new government in terms of exports, in terms of the GDP. So we have already reached 100 billion GDP, and it's expected to grow at 5%, but that is not what we want. We want to go beyond, and we are very confident that we could do that as well. So, So this is the Sri Lankan export basket. It's called the complexity of exports. So we are at the lowest level where the orange says your complexity is very low. We still export to the world or to the value chain of the globe very basic products. So it can be, the competition is so high on this, and we are really not adding much value. But if you really look at the Vietnam, it's green, because the complexity of the product basket is so different. And they have ensured that they invest as a country in products that cannot be replaced, that is technically high and technically high value adding. So this is a transformation that they have taken over the last 20 years. If you take South Korea, even India, you would find this has happened. And this index is something that we need to watch and to see whatever we are doing today is making sense and making our orange chart to green as we go forward. So these three things is what I believe that we need to really look at. Now we as a country still have a lot of resources as raw material, but are we adding value? Not enough. There's a lot of room to add value to every agricultural product that we do, add value to all the minerals that we have, add value to people that we hold, add value to land that we hold. There is a lot of opportunity, even from tech sector, from BPO outsourcing to high-tech R&D and design, we can move ahead. And then if you really look at our factor productivity is extremely low. If you take a land plot of this country and the amount of income that we generate out of it, if you take a single person and the per capita income generation is quite low. So this is a second thing that we need to focus, and creating IP. We need to create our own brands, we need to create our own products, and that is how we could really reap the benefit of the global value chain. And as a country strategy, I think in terms of industrial transformation plays a key role, because we have not seen Industry 3, Industry 4, now we are talking about Industry 5. So our industries have not transformed into productivity or into circularity or digital. So there is a lot of work that needs to do on the industrial transformation. As I said, diversification of the export basket through innovation and R&D is a key strategy, and access to market. So this probably will be the key game changer for us to go forward. I'll talk about this a little more. And there's supply chain integration. So we try to still send goods to end consumer, but we are not part of real supply chains. We are not creating components for a final product. We are not part of a product that's been sold in the world, and we are not part of that product value chain. So that is a key area that we need to look at. As I said, the total factor productivity is a big strategy, looking at land especially, and the skill development. So our skill is not quite competent enough to support such an industrial transformation, neither to support the world. We still have 1.2 million working, or close to 1 million working in Middle East as housemaids and very basic jobs. So this is what we want to focus on. But I want to give you a little bit of highlight what has happened over the last 2 to 3 years, and I would be accounting for the last 1.5 years of 2025 as a fiscal year. So the strength is, we are moving from strength to strength because our revenues have now moved up to 16.6% of GDP. Mind you, to remind you that 2022 it was at 8.2. And we had the opportunity of reaching about 18 to 20% even with the tax structure we had in 2019 if you were smart enough to collect our revenue. And that is happening very prudently and efficiently now. The debt to GDP has come down to 91%, and we do have a surplus in the primary account. The monetary side is also stable. Exchange rate devaluation is around 5%. Interest rates are hovering about 7%, and the inflation is at 2.2%, probably will reach 5% with the adjustments that happened in the world last few months. Export has gone 8%. And in the exports itself, we see a significant growth in the new markets, that is the East Asia, Africa, and India. And the key sectors, some of the sectors have grown over 20% in 2025. So this gives a great platform for us to proceed on exports. We have been talking about FDIs. Even today's topic is that even whether it's quality or not, we have got 1.1 billion last year, far better than the previous year. And we have got inquiries into Port City to worth of 4.6 billion. And 1.4 billion will be invested within these 2 years, especially on the infrastructure. On the investment side, the 2 trillion capital has been lended by our capital markets to private sector. And early that 2 trillion would have gone to the government. So government has not borrowed in 2025 as much as, it's very low percentage, and entire credit has flown into private sector. Interesting to note, apart from 240 billion, which is used for personal consumption, everything has gone to industry. So that's a very remarkable figure, and I know that is going to give us more benefits in this year because those money would have got invested last year. And the external debt, we have paid 5.1 billion worth of external debt servicing, including interest and capital. We have a 7.3 billion reserve, which will push up to 8 billion with the 2 tranches that's going to come from IMF, and 3.5 billion a year that we might have to pay going forward, which is quite serviceable. So Sri Lanka is out of the woods at this point, touch wood again. But other than external shock, we don't see anything internal that's going to stop us moving fast. And on the reforms that can bring us quality investments, today's topic, just want to note and keep highlighted that one of the biggest changes that we are going through is a tariff policy. I would count it as the number 1 change Sri Lanka will go through. We are removing para tariffs after decades. 3 decades we have agreed to do that, and government is sticking by it. It's not an easy task. It's going to hurt a lot, but we are going to stick to it. Within 4 years, the para tariffs will be over. With this change, we are now open to multilateral agreements that can connect us to the eastern market, the rest of the world. And I think Subha has done a very nice research paper on this, and I learned from that a year ago how small countries can succeed by connecting to the market surrounding them. And then the Port City Act we've amended. Now it's absolutely clear who can invest, how, and all the processes have been very much cleared. Every quarter we have made some adjustments to the Port City Act, and that has made the investors' lives easier and transparent. Strategic Investment Act was amended. Now it's very clear who can invest for what and what kind of tax holidays you will get. Earlier it was very ambiguous. You need to meet the minister or the president. Now you don't have to meet us. The policy is extremely clear. It's rule-based. So if you bring a particular amount of money and for a particular amount of employment, you get your tax holidays. And last week, actually 2 days before, the rescue, rehabilitation and insolvency, and this was a missing piece in the country. The previous one, mind you, it was 1853 Solvency Act. So we lived with that and we didn't have a problem with it as citizens, right? So we did, but nobody cared. And it's been implemented. There may be some adjustments that need to be done, but now we have a law. And then the Private-Public Partnership Act will be in place by May, end of May or early June. So that will enable government to co-invest with private sector. So that will attract a lot of FDIs. The roads, the bridges, the infrastructure, the hospitals now can be invested by private sector alongside government and make revenue out of it. SOE Management Act will be in play. So there will never be, I would say, a burden on the treasury going forward. SOEs will be managed under that act. Most of the commercial SOEs will come under one entity as a portfolio, and rest of it will have a better guidelines how to manage them. And then the Investment Protection Act will be strengthened within this year as well. So these are reforms that was not there some time back. So this is going to set the ground for the rest of the investments to look at Sri Lanka than what they used to see us a few years ago. And what needs to happen, so what I shared was what happened, what needs to happen. So we are working on the single window for trade. So initially it will be open for tea sector and apparel, I think. So there's a pilot that's running within 6 months. Single window for trade will open on a digital platform for facilitating trade. Now we have to integrate more than 17 entities to send a shipment and integrate more than 5 entities to clear a shipment. So these things will make it lives efficient. And the export strategy is we got the cabinet approval last week, so it will be in play. Not beyond the strategy, we will look at the implementation side of it. There's a lot to do on that. Then the infrastructure and the land access will be looked at very clearly. So each district, the land is getting cleared for industrialization. We have only 0.1% of our land parcels for industries. And that is why there is no opportunity to develop. So now the government will make clear which land for industry, which for agriculture, which for tourism, which for renewable energy, which for residencies. So this will be clearly demarcated, and one fine day it will be digitally available on a map for somebody to tap and invest. And digital governance, government service is moving very fast. The digital team is making remarkable strides in terms of making a digital platform for the government services to become more efficient. And the education reforms are taking place both at the level of preschools to tertiary education, especially looking at skill. The education reforms will give us children various paths at the grade 9, more than 10 paths and avenues to choose from that will be linked to the industrial needs. And the transformation of customs, of course, it's taking place. I know everybody talks about it. That is a big elephant in the room, and I'm pretty sure President and everybody is aware of it, and that we will fix the problems on customs, which is age-old problems, but will make it more efficient going forward. So with these changes, we feel that Sri Lanka will be open and ready to call in for investments. As a Deputy Minister for Industries, I am very hesitant to go for investment forums because I don't have much to offer. So when these things are done, Sri Lanka will be absolutely clear and open doors more than now. I know there is a lot of traction because of the world situation. Sri Lanka is becoming a place to watch. And when somebody gets attracted and want to invest, it has to be easy. It has to be accessible. It has to be clear. It has to be transparent. That, my friends, 1.5 years is not enough. You need to give us a little bit of time. We are changing a 70-year-old legacy, and it's not easy. The same people who has worked before us in the government sector, we are working with them. Very difficult. We don't have systems. Some forum I have said that we don't use emails. Yes, the server was replaced A 20-year-old server was replaced in 2025, email server. Right? So this is the level Sri Lankan government was. And we are building, and we are confident, and we are sure, and we know what needs to run, but it will take a little bit time. So when it comes to the topic, what is a quality FDI? I wouldn't say the FDIs that are here are not quality enough. But where we want to reach and what we want to become, we now need to be very selective and attract specific type of FDIs. Why? Our land is limited. Our resources are limited. We can give all the land to anybody who comes out of the door, or are we going to be very selective and are we going to be very careful on what type of quality investments that we are going to take place? Now, if you really talk today, we have the European Union delegates here. We know to service Europe, you can't service like today. You need to be conscious about circularity. You need to be conscious about transparency. You need to adhere to the standards of the consumers. And you need to be efficient enough to service such a market. And those transformations we need to work very rapidly. Apart from few industries which have reached, majority of the industries in Sri Lanka is not capable of reaching such markets. So when we attract FDIs, we will have to think about productivity. If you are giving a plot of land, what is the yield we are going to get? What is the level of income we are going to generate? What is the level of exports that we are going to generate out of single square footage that we are going to give? So productivity will be a key indicator in attracting quality investments. And the value chain integration, which I was mentioning to you earlier, rather supplying end consumer, can we really be part of a strong partner in a global value chain? A global product or a global product that gets delivered somewhere, produced somewhere, and can we create a component for that? Can we create more, which we are doing now, but can we do more? Can we be part of the vehicle industry, supplying some component? Can we be part of the world silicon industry, supplying some component directly to the end manufacturer, not to the end consumer, or not to a middleman who's going to buy raw material from us and sell for a higher value? And when it comes to access to new markets, if any investment is helping us to open doors for another market, a Japanese investment or a Chinese investment or an Indian investment that's going to come and partner one of our industries here and help them to access that market, that's going to be a game changer for us. And that we are looking at collaboration in that side. And niche and high value addition industries. So we know certain markets are niche but growing. For example, organic agriculture. It's a small market, but it's growing. Market on graphene. It's small market, but that's going to grow. So there are smaller markets in the world that you can carve out from the large place. And if any investment is really looking at an innovative way of building a particular product range or an area to grow, that we would love to have such investments here. And sustainability and circular. So whoever comes in future to establish for long run, they have to have a view or a vision or a process or a strategy around circularity and sustainability. Lastly, drive inclusive growth. We have to admit 27% of our population is poor. And other than Colombo, Western province, every other province is providing, I would say, in totality, 30% of our GDP. So we have to ensure that whatever the investments comes, it's inclusive. And that investment will allow more and more SMEs to connect to them as supply chains. And that income is distributed in terms two places which are required. So when it comes to quality investments, so these are things that we will have to watch for and create policies, create incentives in attracting. So my invitation here, those who are here, when we are attracting investments, we need to watch for this. I mean, I have been in the government industry for 17 years. I know it can't sustain in the same way that we are going to sustain. Sri Lanka is a small country, and we won't have enough labor to supply at that scale. So then the value chain in apparel industry has to improve, and the organizations will have to go up in the value chain. So what we attracted in 1990 as apparel industry is not worthwhile in attracting today. It has to be either high-tech or it has to be driven by technology in terms of R&D. So this is what we should look for going forward. So in simple, the government is putting the building blocks right, and it will take a little bit of time, but we have identified what needs to be done, what can be done within the last 1.5 years we have done, and there are things that will get done during 2026, but there are certain reforms that will take 2 to 3 years to flourish. And we've seen how Vietnam converted, we've seen how South Korea did it, we know how India did it. It took them 2 decades or 3 decades, but we will have to do it in 5 years or 10 years. So that's the level of responsibility and task that we have taken on our shoulders, and I hope all of you will be part of it. Yes, we can criticize till the cows come home, but there is something remarkable that's happening from the structures. So we should look at the structural changes and keep fighting for that change. And politically, we are very much willing to do that as a government. We know the end goal. It's a prosperous country for all. It's an inclusive economy that we want to create. Our end goal is so clear. We are a left-aligned government. We are not shy to say that. We are a center-left government. We want to eradicate poverty, and that is our goal. And if we've been here 10 years, and if the poverty level is 25%, we would not even come for election. There's no point. So this is the task in our hand, and we know Sri Lanka has enormous potential. And to reap that, we missed 30 years of our good lives, and I know who are here, some of you, probably at the latter stage of your lives, we want to see this country flourish, and that we are, I mean, it's okay, I'm 43, right? So this is the latter part of my life also. So I want to see it through. I know you all do. So let's make it happen. So this is my pitch to all of you, and I'm from Ministry of Change. Thank you.
We now turn to our distinguished EU representative for the opening remarks of the evening. Her Excellency Carmen Moreno is a senior Spanish diplomat with over 30 years of experience in international relations, development cooperation, and peace building. She has served extensively in Asia, including in India, Pakistan, China, and Malaysia, and has held the position of Director General for Development Cooperation with Asia at the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Her work has consistently bridged sustainable development with trade and investment promotion. She currently serves as the European Union Ambassador to Sri Lanka and to the Maldives, following previous ambassadorial roles in the EU in Cambodia and Spain in Thailand. It's now my pleasure to invite Her Excellency Ambassador Carmen Moreno to deliver the opening remarks.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Governor, thank you so much for joining us today. Dear colleagues, dear friends, it's difficult to follow Minister Chathuranga's speech. He is very upbeat, and he has presented a vision that is really encouraging. This is a very critical moment, and that's why we decided to do this panel. Last year, we had a discussion here on trade, on how trade can be a driver of growth. This year, we wanted to talk the other side of the coin, investment. They both go together. Trade gives you an opportunity. Investment is what will let you build the capacity to use better that opportunity. It's true that the government has made a remarkable progress stabilizing the economy under the IMF program and delivering growth of 5% in the last 2 years. But it now has a very, very difficult task ahead, which is the reform he was talking about. That's more, I think, much more difficult. So these reforms and many others are needed to attract this quality investment and deliver inclusive and sustainable growth to Sri Lanka. Growth that really touches the people, that raises the incomes, and that they can find in the country the jobs that now they have to go abroad to find. So achieving this investment, pulling into this capital, is not an option, it's a necessity. Investment is what allows countries to build infrastructure, especially connectivity infrastructure, to raise productivity, and to become more competitive in the world stage. So investment is moving the economies from producing more of the same thing. This has been the case of Sri Lanka, unfortunately, in the past years, to producing more complex, more competitive goods and higher value. So this is how investment has also become part of the development discourse. The global growth agenda and the global development agenda is now dominated by the discourse on investments. And in the last UN International Conference for Financing of Development, it was recognized that investment and innovation are the central drivers for sustainable development. Sri Lanka is entering this competition for foreign direct investment at a very critical moment, a moment in which we are watching how the world is getting fragmented, becoming more competitive, supply chains are being reorganized, and some critical value chains like energy, food, raw materials, medicines have moved to the center of a foreign policy. They are no longer the domain of economic policy, they are foreign policy. The digital and green transformations are changing the fundamentals of competitiveness. And geopolitical conflict, that we have been seeing now happening in the Middle East, can bring sudden external shocks to all of our economies. More worries uneven. UNTAC has estimated that in the past 2 years, foreign direct investment has contracted by more than 11 percentage points. So there is not so much money in circulation as there was before. So competition to attract investment in this context is becoming harder and harder. And countries are competing for a smaller pool of resources and a more risk-averse investors. So what the panelists will discuss today is how Sri Lanka can enter this competition. The question is not, should Sri Lanka compete? No. Is Sri Lanka, how does Sri Lanka build itself as an attractive and credible investment destination? You all have competitive advantages. We all know it, your location, your proximity to India, to Southeast Asia, access to important markets like the European market through GSP+, deep sea ports, human capital, beautiful country. But today, global environment, investors demand not only a list of advantages, they need to see direction. They need to understand where Sri Lanka wants to position itself in the coming years. Are you going to be a logistics platform, a hub for services, a location for high technology-based manufacturing, a destination for sustainable tourism, a producer of clean energy, or are you a reliable partner, a +1 in regional value chains? So leaders are expected to build a vision. We have seen Minister Chathuranga has given us a glimpse of this vision for the future, and implement the necessary reforms to turn the vision into reality. No country can attract quality investment just by marketing itself. It must become easier to invest in, easier to produce in, and easier to export in. To undertake this transformation, Sri Lanka has to work with all willing partners. And in this regard, the European Union is an important investment partner for many in the region. Many people in Sri Lanka do not know that the European Union, the 27 member states, are the largest investor in the world. Because other countries are more visible in Asia, like China, this fact is not known. We are not only the largest investor, but also the largest recipient of investment in the world. Our portfolio outside the European Union is in 2024 was 9 trillion euros of foreign direct investment stocks. For you to have a reference, the stock of China, the official stock of China, outbound, is 3-point-something trillion euros. Ours is 9 trillion. So the global footprint of European companies is very, very large, and is growing in Asia. In Central Asia, for instance, the European Union is already the largest investors. We have 40% of the total FDI in Central Asia. In India, more than 6,000 European companies are already present, and European investment stock reach more than 130 billion in 2024, making us a leading investor in the country. We expect this to multiply now that we have reached a FTA agreement that opens a lot of opportunities for European companies in India. We are also big in ASEAN, and we have just finalized an agreement with Indonesia. We have FTAs with Singapore and Vietnam, and we are negotiating with Thailand and Malaysia. So in many parts of Asia, European companies are already a reliable partner for energy transition, transport and infrastructure, logistics, advanced manufacturing and services. If you look around, you will find that European companies invest in countries that have managed to build a credible proposition. Predictable rules, vision and direction, connectivity, skills, and access to wider markets. Our investment is demanding, but it's also transformative. It comes with transfer of technology, high standards, management capacity, and skills. And you can see all this already in Sri Lanka, where you can find European investors in the most dynamic export sectors, like apparel and in rubber. Our global gateway strategy supports countries precisely to build themselves as an investment destination. It is designed to help partner countries mobilize European public and private investment around quality infrastructure, connectivity, energy, digital systems, and skills. It is a powerful tool to support countries that are ready to build the right conditions for high-quality investment. So the question is whether Sri Lanka is ready to leverage its potential to connect production and consumers across a much wider space than its domestic market alone. So I leave you now with the panelists. I'm sure they will touch upon all and these many other subjects and will give us very valuable insights in this matter. I want to thank you all again for being here. Thanks the Minister, even if he's gone, and Verité Research, and especially Malinda and Subhashini for organizing this event. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those remarkable insights. To anchor our discussion in evidence, we now move to a context-setting presentation that will frame key trends, opportunities, and constraints shaping Sri Lanka's quest for quality investment. I now invite Mr. Mathisha Arangala, Lead Economist at Verité Research, to take the stage. Mr. Arangala specializes in trade policy with research interests spanning international relations, public procurement, foreign development assistance, and South Asian geopolitics. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Mathisha Arangala.
My presentation will set the context by looking at what is shaping these global investments, and then the panel discussion will follow where the panelists will look at how Sri Lanka can respond to this. So just initially, I want to draw your attention to this graph. This shows what has happened to Sri Lanka's FDI, and I mean, we already know this. But this is interesting to see that since the late 90s, when globalization was in full swing and global supply chains were rising, developing economies, and this is excluding China, mind you, has been able to considerably increase the FDI as a percentage of GDP. But Sri Lanka has lagged behind. And one key reason for this has been the fact that Sri Lanka has consistently failed to anticipate global trends and position themselves to take advantage. But today, now we are at another impasse. Like in the late 90s, supply chains are disrupting again. And these disruptions are also creating certain opportunities. So if Sri Lanka fails to anticipate these changes in a timely manner, the risk is that we might lose out again. So in lieu of this, I would like to take you over 4 key factors driving global investment flows today. So the first is geopolitical developments, 2, technological advances, 3, rising protectionism, and 4, rising climate change and environmental concerns. So if we come to geopolitical developments, as was already mentioned, geopolitical tensions are rising. And this is also, in a way, changing how investors look at where they invest as well as what sectors they invest in as well. And this is kind of apparent in how investors are conditioning in and incorporating geopolitical risk into their overall risk perceptions. So this is A.T. Kearney's FDI Confidence Index. And what this shows is that increase in geopolitical tensions has been voted as the top risk item by investors in 2026. And mind you, this survey was done before the current Middle East crisis. And this is actually been reflected in FDI data as well. So one way in which geopolitical distance between countries are measured is by looking at the differences or the similarities in how countries vote in the UN General Assembly. So if their voting patterns are similar, then the geopolitical distance between those countries is less, and if they differ, the geopolitical distance is larger. And this World Bank study, recent World Bank study, looked at this indicator, and what it found was that back in 2011, FDI between a country and its partner decreased by 8% if the two countries voted differently in the UN General Assembly. But now it's decreasing by 16%. So what this shows is that the penalty on FDI for geopolitical distance has always been there, but now it has doubled. So the second factor is technological developments, and this is especially relevant now with the advancements in AI. And technology is actually reshaping investments in two key ways. In one way, it's concentrating investments while also fragmenting it. So let me show you how. So how is it concentrating investments? Increasingly, we can see that FDI is mostly directed towards tech investments, and these are the largest greenfield projects announced in 2025. And what we can see is most of them are in data centers, semiconductors, and things like rare earth metals. And this shows in actual FDI data as well. So this shows tech infrastructure services, greenfield investments in tech infrastructure services as a percentage of total greenfield investments. And what we can see is from 9% in 2016, it has increased to 38% now. And as a result, what we're also seeing is traditional global value chain sectors like apparel are in decline. So new investments in those have decreased by 40% when we compare 2024 to 2025. And even in sectors like automotives, while semiconductors and data centers have increased in value. And the other way investments are concentrating is that the increased focus on tech investments seem to be leaving developing countries behind. So this graph from the World Bank shows that actually, in terms of the share of total investments, advanced economies in Europe, East Asia, and North America take the largest chunk. And even if we look at the growth rate over the last 10 years, North America is on top. While we can see that certain economies in East Asia and South Asia have experienced growth in these sectors, especially in things like data centers, this is also concentrating only in a few countries, like India, Malaysia, Brazil, especially if we take things like data center investments. And this is the most important point, right? The increased focus on tech is also changing the factors investors consider when determining where they want to invest. So back in 2015, things like domestic market size, tax rates, and government transparency and general security were at the top of investors' minds when they determined where they want to invest. But in 2026, this has changed to tech innovation and capability, ease of moving capital, legal regulatory efficiency, and investor and property rights. In a way, actually, this is a good sign for Sri Lanka. Because Sri Lanka, being a small economy, we can never compete on domestic market size. And currently, after reeling from the crisis that we had, the fiscal constraints, we can't give anyone exorbitant tax concessions either. But we do have a chance to be more innovative, efficient, compared to the larger countries like India. And that is, though, conditional on Sri Lanka getting its act together. The other key feature that we can see here is cost of labor. So this was in the top 5 considerations in 2015. It's not in the top 5 in 2026, and it's not in the top 10 either. And one reason for this also links to the improvements in technology, because what we can see is AI and other improvements have also increased businesses' tendency to automate business processes. And as a result, this means less demand for low-cost labor. And it's not only in manufacturing that we are seeing this, even in services. So this statistics is very sort of revealing. This shows net BPO hires in India. And it shows that in each 2024 and 2025, the net BPO hires has reduced to less than 17,000 from 130,000 back in 2023 and 177,000 back in 2022. So what this means for countries like Sri Lanka and India, where BPO services were an important avenue for us to get into these tech sectors, BPO as well as KPO services. So what this means is like something that we need to sort of really consider. And again, like in addition to concentrating, why am I saying that tech is making investments fragment as well? So what we also saw with tech developments, AI and drone technology, is that technology is increasingly becoming dual use. So it can be used both for military and commercial uses. And as a result, countries are increasingly using industrial policy to control access to these technologies. So this chart from the IMF shows, this is in 2023, create distortive industrial policies by sector. Most of the rise in these industrial policies have been due to military use, civilian dual use sectors, so that's the purple area, and low carbon technology, advanced technology, and semiconductors. So this also has a geopolitical angle to it, which also suggests that increasingly technological diffusion will be constrained as these strategic sectors are going to be increasingly concentrated within these geopolitical blocks. So the third factor is rising protectionism. As we can clearly see in this chart, so this chart shows liberalizing trade-related policy measures and discriminatory trade-related policy measures globally. And the gap between liberalizing measures and discriminatory measures has increased considerably over the past 5 years, 5 to 6 years. And what this has also done is, increasingly, a lot of this protectionism is happening unilaterally, bypassing the WTO. And the contrast is, while the WTO had sheltered a lot of these small countries like Sri Lanka from harsh trade terms, the new type of protectionism does not. It doesn't differentiate between small countries and large countries. So the best example is the Liberation Day tariffs in the US last year, whereby smaller countries like Lesotho, even islands, and Sri Lanka had higher tariffs initially when compared to much larger countries. So the fourth factor is increasing climate and environmental concerns. So this is actually being driven by three things. From the demand side, consumers are actually willing to pay more for goods that meet specific environmental criteria. And as a result, governments are also, because of the increased demand from the public, governments are also increasingly putting mandatory sustainable reporting standards. So CBAM in the EU is a good example. But here, too, a geopolitical aspect comes in, whereby the recent disruptions we have seen, especially in the Strait of Hormuz, means that like certain staples like oil and gas has become disrupted and prices have fluctuated. And as a result, what we also see is governments increasingly investing in renewable energy, and not only governments, even consumers, in order to reduce their dependence on fossil fuel imports. And as a result of this, we also see business priorities change when they consider investments. So it's changing from lean and cost considerations to cost considerations are still important, but green production and compliance considerations. So when they are deciding on a country, they are looking at what the renewable energy makeup of that country is, how the labor laws are like, and what the mechanism is to ensure traceability is. And this is also reflected in the investments. So the amount of investments, global greenward FDI per technology type, so this is climate and energy transition investments, actually peaked in 2023, although it has reduced since then, but $600 billion worth in 2023. So just to make sense of all this, what we are seeing as a result is now the factors which made global supply chains work is now kind of unwinding. So there are three things that made it work. One is a global reduction in tariffs. Over the last 60 years, that is what the trend was. But now we are seeing increasing protectionism, as was mentioned. Two, predictable maritime transport and lower cost in shipping. But now shipping costs are on the rise, and shipping choke points are increasingly being weaponized. So that is also a sort of a reversal. And then the rise in digital technology facilitated the rise in supply chains, especially communications technology, like in the internet. But here too, what we are seeing is sort of like technology has become a source of fragmentation as well. Standards are changing, different countries are doing their own thing. But it's not all gloomy, because these disruptions are creating a vital opportunity if we consider Sri Lanka. Supply chains are emerging right next door in the form of a resurging India. And if we take a look at these, India's FDI growth over the past 20 years, this is apparent. Brands are establishing footprints in India, and what this means is that the opportunity for the neighboring countries to cater to Indian supply chains has increased, and in turn, it has also increased the opportunity to cater to India's growing consumer market. But what we can see here is that Sri Lanka's peers are already far ahead of us in taking advantage of this. They are already exporting to India, and as a result, they are more poised to take better advantage of India. So if we take a look at Sri Lanka, merchandise exports to India between 2005 and 2024, Sri Lanka's exports has increased from just 600 million in 2005 to just 900 million in 2024. It hasn't even doubled. In contrast, Vietnam exported just $100 million worth of exports to India, less than Sri Lanka, but today it's at 9 billion, so a 90x increase. And the same is true for Indonesia and Thailand as well. And even countries outside Asia are now trying to secure access to India, and they're doing this urgently. So one example, the EU, India FTA signed in 2026 after a delay of almost 20 years. Australia has the EDCA with India, which came into force in 2022. New Zealand in 2026. The UK in 2025. And even far-off countries like Chile. Now, the India-Chile Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement is set to finalize in 2026. So what I would like to end my presentation is with how Sri Lanka is positioned to capture this. So one factor which Sri Lanka needs to focus on is economic fundamentals. And as we saw before, with respect to how investment priorities are also changing, it's shifting towards efficiency, speed, and innovation, and capabilities. However, if we take a look at these indicators, from the corruption perception to global innovation index to regulatory quality, logistics performance, and education metrics, Sri Lanka lags far behind much larger countries who have market size going for it already. And another thing which is important for countries like Sri Lanka, small countries like Sri Lanka, is market access. So this shows the number of countries with market access for each of these countries in the Asia-Pacific region. And while Sri Lanka currently has access to 9 countries through their FTAs, much larger countries like India, China, Vietnam, and all these other countries have access to over 15 countries. And what we have to focus on here is that it's not just the trade agreements which matter, but how comprehensive they are. While, except for Singapore and Thailand, all the other trade agreements, the countries we have trade agreements with are in trading goods, agreements in trading goods. In contrast, in addition to having more countries with market access, a lot of these countries have comprehensive access to these markets. So not just in goods, but services and investments as well. And this is increasingly important in supply chains today, because component trade is no longer just determined by market access and tariffs. It depends on efficiency at the border. And this is why it's really important for Sri Lanka to push for these comprehensive agreements to ensure that these supply chains are more resilient. So what I would like to end with is this. So the question we should ask is, can Sri Lanka move from being a position to being positioned? And increasingly, so what this map also shows is, if Sri Lanka doesn't act fast, especially considering, as even the ambassador mentioned, the increased competition in the region, we can easily turn from being a potential strategic moat in the region to an afterthought. So, yeah, thank you.
As to what Sri Lanka must do, in practical terms, to convert investor interest to a committed quality investment. This session will be moderated by Mr. Shamindra Kulamanage, co-founder and publisher of Echelon Media Group. Mr. Shamindra is a media entrepreneur, editor, and publisher. Echelon Media Group publishes the Echelon, Economy Next, and Neon Media brands, both in Sinhala and English. Joining him on the panel is Mr. Bingumal Thevathantri, Chief Executive Officer of Standard Chartered Bank in Sri Lanka and also the Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. With over 30 years of experience in banking and finance, Mr. Bingumal has held leadership positions at Standard Chartered Bank across Sri Lanka and Africa, and he is also the former chairman of Sri Lanka's Bankers Association. Mr. Talal Rafi, an economist who has served as a consultant to the Asian Development Bank and the European Union. He is also a regular columnist for the IMF's Public Financial Management Forum and a member of the World Economic Experts Network. His work has been published by the World Bank, the IMF, the ADB, the World Economic Forum, and the London School of Economics. Ms. Subhashini Abeysinghe, Research Director at Verité Research, and a renowned economist whose work spans in trade policy, trade facilitation, global value chains, and regional and multilateral trade agreements. Her latest research examines China's economic engagement in Sri Lanka and the geo-economic competition between India and China. Mr. Martin Klose, Chief Delegate of AHK Sri Lanka, the delegation of the German Industry and Commerce, he brings over 35 years of experience driving German industry across Asia with previous leadership roles in China, Myanmar, Thailand, and Vietnam. May I now invite Mr. Shamindra and the panelists to come on stage.
By way of a small programming note, I think I noticed the program has a QR code, so if you do wish to put in those questions, I'd encourage you to do so fairly early on. I think we've had a fantastic foundation for this discussion with the backgrounder and of course also what the Deputy Minister contributed to earlier in the day. How we will do this is we will, I'll ask the panelists to weigh in. I think we are looking at the second part of this equation. How can Sri Lanka position itself given what's happening globally, given the recent uncertainty we've seen too. And if you haven't participated in a FDI related discussion recently, there was a great sense of deja vu listening to some of the thoughts that were presented. But I think what's unfolded in a technology, supply chain, geopolitical sense over the last few years has really created a new layer of challenges. And Bingu, I'll bring you in. We'll start the discussion with you. I'll bring you in here. To start with, Sri Lanka's economy is now clearly through the recovery phase. I think we are very much, whether it be industry, whether it be the people of this country, are looking for growth, looking for what the future is going to be framed like. At the same time, things have changed profoundly. When we first discussed the idea for this conference this evening, what has unfolded in the Middle East wasn't a factor. And when you look at that, plus what's happened over the last 5 or 6 years across the world, in supply chains, with technology, and all those other forces that are shaping things. What are the considerations, do you think, from an FDI perspective that are different today for an investor from what it was 5 or 6 years ago?
Yeah, thanks, Shamindra. Yeah, just to give a quick overview of where we are. We had I think decent fourth quarter last year. Even our first quarter was very good in my view. And the recent challenge is a very unique challenge, and Sri Lanka has managed the situation at the moment. I think is reasonably good compared to some of the markets that we operate around the world. So we have to give credit on that. Coming back to your point, I think we can't go back to the last 5 or 6 years. You're spot on. We just had to look at the last 3 to 6 months because the world order has changed. Just to give you some numbers, last year numbers are like something like 1.6 trillion. Those are the FDI numbers. larger part of the FDIs actually went to the matured markets, the developed markets. Europe got a lot of FDIs last year. I agree, it's largely on the tech side and all of that. Actually, the developing countries, the FDIs came down by 2%. So Sri Lanka actually gained on FDIs last year, but a lot of the developing countries, the FDIs came down. Solely because post-COVID, a lot of the countries, the sovereign ratings went down and countries went through a lot of stress. Now, just one mantra about FDIs is we spoke a lot about how to get FDIs and all of that. World has changed the last 2-3 months. One mantra is stability. You know, even if you put money in a village, if you build a little resort in a village, you look at whether your money is safe. Can you make money on the money? Can you take it back? That's what a simple investment strategist or for a very small investment to a large investment, that's what investors look at. The other things come, you know, tax and treaties and everything comes later. Of course, market is a big component. On that front, Sri Lanka has failed miserably, right? Because you need political stability, that's number one. Macro stability, policy and policy consistency. Those are the 4 things. Then everything else is on top of that. So we have failed on many of that. I don't want to go back to the past. Let's talk about the current situation we are in. Now with the Middle Eastern crisis, there are different views about when this war will come to an end. The reality is the 39 kilometers long strait. A security of a strait has basically put the entire world on hold. And the oil price have gone above 120. Now we hear there's some amount of peace happening. But these are my personal views. This can move into, you know, frozen conflict. You know, there can be peace, there can be again little tension here and there. So world won't be the same. Geopolitics have changed. The alignments have changed. We've seen India signing a treaty with EU after 20 years of negotiation, right? So these are like new things. We've seen Trump tariffs, of course, a lot of those things were reversed. But you can really see that US is trying to hold that position and manage the petrodollar and, you know, continue that rally. So you can see that pressure building as well. You only think the US has not seen the pressure yet as an economy. They're doing very well, by the way. So globally, geopolitics have changed. The alignments have changed. With that, the only good news for us is Sri Lanka is the only, I would say, #1 neutral country in South Asia. As you all know, SAARC is a very dysfunctional geopolitical organization. We never sat together and did anything good. But the current context, if you look at, Sri Lanka in this beautiful neutral position, and we're friends with everybody. Everyone comes here, and we are also in the middle of the world, you know, accessing, you know, experiencing the growth of South-South trade. With this war situation, what can also happen is the South-South trade is now about 28%, maybe close to 30%. South-South trade will grow at a rate. You know, you'll see that wealth shifting from west to the east. You see the eastern companies buying some of the western companies. So all this wealth shift is happening here right in the center. So that's where the opportunity is. Now Sri Lanka is again seeing this opportunity, because we've seen opportunities many times in the last 70 years. Again, we are seeing a new opportunity, new economic cycle. Now what do we do about it? Naturally, I mean, since we are a hub and I know the location, shipping and logistics is a huge opportunity. We are going into something like 10 million TEUs this year. That was not planned for this war. But we are now reaching to 10 million, actually crossing 10 million TEUs this year. That's 1/4 of the Singapore size. Right? Just to give you perspective. Singapore contributes something like 7% of the GDP. We contribute only 2.3%. Why? Because we don't have the entire ecosystem. We don't have storage, warehousing, single window for trade. You've been talking about it all the time. You know, the customs policies, procedures, entrepreneur trade, that whole part is missing. We're just a port. It's a great outcome. We're just a port for India. We're doing a great job, but we can do a lot more in this new world order. I'm not talking about, worrying too much about Red Sea and all of that, but Sri Lanka will see that trade opportunities. If you want to drill down on that, I can talk long on that one. But again, sustainable tourism is another big one in the new world order, because people will find it difficult to travel. The prices have gone up. I think the prices will be high for some time, even if the war comes to complete settlement today. Right? The damage done for the infrastructure is enormous. Oil price will be above 80, 85, 90 for some time. Sri Lanka will see at least a short-term opportunity. If we bring the right set of tourists in at this time, it will create a story for Sri Lanka. More people will come because we are very small as a tourist destination. Third one is the whole tech hub. the KPO, BPO piece, we've seen some flows, early signs of some of the Dubai operators talking to us, and I mean, there are a lot of talks about it. I think we have to get, again, the policy framework right. Can you come here and work for 5 years? Is there a work permit process? Answer is no. Right? So those are real challenges for an expat to work here. Every year you have to go and renew your expat permit. Digital nomad is a great outcome, but annual expat permits I've never heard. I worked outside. You go on a contract, 4 years straight, you get a contract for you and your there's problem over. So there's this long list in terms of if you want to attract that investment into the country. Of course, the other one is India plus one. Because with India growing at 6-7%, and India is now got a treaty with EU, and we should piggyback on that. And also India got a massive amount of Korean and Japanese investors manufacturing, especially into automotives and tech. They are looking at actually expanding their supply chain because they are finding it difficult to find all the components in India at the right price. There's an opportunity again. So you can go on and on. I think we have, what I'm trying to say is we are again seeing this opportunity. There's another new cycle. And again, the location is the God-given gift to us. We have to capitalize.
Fantastically hopeful way to start the conversation. That's great. Martin, let me bring you in, right? From a German and a broader EU perspective, given what Bingumal alluded to also, the geopolitical instability we've recently seen and all these other forces that are reshaping how FDI is being channeled, how do you see Sri Lanka's position as an investor, as a potential EU investor?
Right. Thank you very much. Great question. And I will try to follow your lead here. I think you touched a couple of really correct points. I mean, we have to look first, I think, at the context of what you mentioned, that FDI overall in developing countries decreased in 2%, right? That's decreased in 2%, and that's a given thing. So we at our home countries, talking about Germany here specifically, European Union is very diverse. So there are some countries who are managing well. Germany has a lot of topics on their shoulder, a lot of issues still coming from, of course, very high grounds. We are still one of the, I think we are the third largest or fourth largest economy right now, but still in the top 5 for sure, I would say. So still going good, but structurally and looking forward, there are a lot of issues: high energy costs, aging population, and many others to mention. So that reflects certainly in investment decisions. No? It's more about risk control. You mentioned that also. That's also what I clearly see. You don't look right now making up your mind, where can I make the most of my money, right? You more strategically look at topics, what is risky, what is not so risky, where do I have really clear guidelines on investment structures, where do I have clarity, where do I have transparency, all of these topics. And when I recall the slide of the gentleman who set the frame here, in most of these topics, we saw Sri Lanka compared to our regional competitors, and that's something which I really want to point out. No, we are not alone here. The companies in the world, there are a lot of attractive destinations where companies are looking at here in the region. Could be could be of course Thailand, Vietnam, but also Bangladesh, and for certain industries, and definitely India in the neighborhood, right? So if I look at the graph of the gentleman who set the tone here for the discussion, Sri Lanka currently is right at the bottom of on most of those indicators here, and that's the hard reality which the companies are, or the investors are actually also looking at. So I do believe that Sri Lanka as a investment destination has certainly certain attractive key points, no? And those are the points that, in my opinion, Sri Lanka really needs to focus on, and this needs to be also brought out to the world and really like highlighted. No? The fact that Sri Lanka has is an attractive destination in maritime shipping is something which everybody knows. No? Somehow everybody knows Port of Colombo is a global brand, I would say. So they know something about maritime business here. But the fact that, for example, if it comes to deep sea shipments, India, which is a rising star, everybody in Germany at least looks at India right now, that vast majority of those shipments come via Sri Lanka. That is something which honestly not in Germany, nobody really knows about that. Everybody, where I'm here for a year now, I tried to figure out USPs of Sri Lanka. What can I use to sell Sri Lanka as an investment destination in Germany? No? And that is the one thing which I felt, if you go to talk to investors, to multipliers in Germany, on the political side, on the economical side, this is something where the people really said, oh, I didn't know that. And this is now specifically in the situation geopolitically where we are right now with the Middle East, certainly one issue, one topic where the Sri Lankan government should really focus on and push that very high up in the agenda to say, hey, look at Sri Lanka, we are a safe country, we have a strategically really well position here in South Asia, and that is so. And next to this, there are obviously, you mentioned then digitization and sustainable goods and exporting to the European Union, GSP plus utilization. There are certain key factors which should be used by the government to really focus on that, and that will be then something where I believe the investors from Germany, from Europe will listen and will look at it. But we need to obviously face and kind of tackle the situation that there are a lot of really good countries in the region where we need to compete with. No?
Talal, I'll bring you in on the discussion, and recently you've engaged private sector firms in Sri Lanka to identify barriers to investment. I don't believe the findings of this work has been published yet. We are hopeful that it will be published soon, but I'll ask you to perhaps even slightly preempt that publication and share with us what you're finding when you talk to Sri Lankan firms about what they see are the primary barriers, and maybe you can kind of help us understand whether these issues have changed over time, changed over the last 5 years.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thanks the organizers, thank you, Delegation, Verité, for having me. So answering that question, first of all, let me confirm the points made by the other speakers. Vast amount.
Oh, hold it very close.
Right, sure. So most of the FDI nowadays, it's been a shift. It's going towards the more developed countries. And there's also the thing about, for example, the importance, because my findings with the private sector was mostly on the foreign direct investment. So the other thing is also what Sri Lanka needs is not just FDI, but export-oriented FDI, something that can bring us the thing. But due to the geopolitics, for example, with the tariffs and China having a $1 trillion surplus, there are many other countries that are trying to cut down their trade deficit. So Sri Lanka is trying to gain FDI, moving into expanding its exports into we are walking right now in a climate that's quite challenging. It's not like how it was 10 years ago. And just broadly speaking, before I just come on to some of the sections, is that investors, when I speak to them, most of them, the priority is not taxes. As usually the reason why we don't get FDI is the blame is usually on the IMF. They've come in with very tight fiscal targets and we can't give concessions. But you don't need tax concessions as a whole. I mean, of course, they would be nice to have as a whole to gain investments. I mean, there's a large number of reforms that could be done without the need for fiscal incentives. So that is one thing. The broader thing is, of course, policy consistency. That's, of course, one of the key things highlighted. And lack of coordination among government institutions. So these are two of the overwhelming response I get when I speak to the private sector. But talking about the main challenges as far as like foreigners want to invest here, they come in like, for example, at the structural level, at the macro level, of course, we have challenges. The country, we are stabilizing, but still, debt is high. According to Fitch, we are at CCC positive, which means there is a real possibility of a default. So we haven't yet come out of that stage. So these are things that investors look into. Because of course, when there is even a slight possibility of a default, that also means that everything would be reset. The IMF can come again, new rules, tightening. So these are some of the broader at the macro level concerns. But generally speaking, at the higher level, of course, the costs also come in. So that will come back to a point of the need for trade liberalization. The high electricity cost, of course, renewable energy, that is one thing. High construction costs, of course, one of the highest. Food prices, vehicles, I think third highest in the world. So when all these add up, these are disincentives for investments to come here. So these are, I'm planning to write a piece with Professor Sirimal on this, how trade liberalization can end poverty and do this point. Hope to finish it soon. So in that too, I want to highlight this. Other points at the macro level are infrastructure. That's another key thing. Human capital, that is essential because a large number of firms say, of course, Sri Lanka has a high human development index. Education is good. But still, are we putting out the correct sort of people inside? If you look at STEM education, only around 4,000 to 5,000 come from state universities into the field. And most of the time, there is a sort of the skills that are needed are not found in there. And also the mode of education, rote-based learning. So it doesn't really produce that's why, I mean, most of the graduates, of course, I mean, this is a thing worldwide, but have to be an intern to understand what's going on. So the style of education, those things also need to change. And of course, at the larger level, sectoral restrictions. These are also things, for example, shipping, as the other speakers spoke, almost doing a quarter of Singapore's and most of Germany's things, exports come through India. But then if you allow some of the larger shipping firms to come in without restrictions, this can be the sort of game changer that we need. Dubai, Singapore, I mean, that's what really put them up. Even if you look at Netherlands, the Dutch, how did they develop? Of course, the trade. And when you have that amount of trade happening, of course, industries develop around them. The second thing is, of course, the governance, which I spoke about, policy uncertainty. That is one of the key things. Lack of coordination. This has, of course, turned a lot of FDIs away. Of course, I give credit to the present government. They are making the right thing. But this is a very, very long, I mean, it's a problem that has been created over decades. So solving these could answer most of Sri Lanka's questions. Labor laws, that is another key thing. When I speak to most foreigners, they talk about land labor. Land is, of course, that's a long discussion. Labor laws, restructuring a firm, Of course, there are new laws, things are beginning to change, but at the moment it's quite difficult to handle these things. State distortions, of course, the state-owned enterprises being in many fields. I mean, look at the financial sector, banks, insurance, finance companies. When you have the government being the regulator, is also a player in that. So it's almost like you have a football game where the the referee is also playing for one side. So it doesn't really help in that sense. The other one would be, of course, trade. Like I mentioned, lack of market access. Certain sectors are kept off for foreigners. High tariffs. This is a key thing. I mean, if you look at most of the examples given have been South Korea, Taiwan, others, but they did this during an era where there was no globalization. I mean, after the 1980s to almost the mid-2010s, we've had rapid globalization. So the critical thing is, why didn't Sri Lanka go in? I saw the presentation by Verité, where Vietnam almost many times increased its trade into India, but Sri Lanka didn't. I mean, we never opened our trade. I mean, about 70% of global trade is supplying value chains of multinational companies. And that is a critical factor that Sri Lanka has been kept out because of the high tariffs. And another, known factor is, on the trade side, there is also the need, why I talk about the need for foreign direct investment in the trade business is because people have to realize that it is multinational companies that do most of the trade exports. If you look at worldwide, it's a study by McKinsey, 82% of global exports is done by multinational companies. About 64% of knowledge-intensive exports are done by multinational companies. So what Sri Lanka, of course, on the trade side needs to do, especially on the FDI side, is pick the sectors where we have the comparative advantage. Because about 40% of global trade is concentrated trade. So it comes from countries which are very small. And there's a bit more, but...
Is it fair to surmise, though, that some of the headline concerns that are coming through include policy uncertainty and the fairly uncoordinated nature of the approach towards FDI? Are those coming right on top from the discussions you had?
Yes. So, of course, policy uncertainty is a major factor in this. Lack of coordination is one thing. But as far as FDI goes, I would always say that I think the public perception is also different. You see, what Sri Lanka needs is to be told the benefits of it. When FDI comes in, it's always usually like selling of state assets or somebody's taking somebody's job, but the benefits have never been shown. Like when a multinational company comes, the amount of jobs that are created, the new sectors that come. For example, what changed Vietnam? It was just South Korea's Samsung coming in. And if you see about a quarter of Vietnam and South Korea's trade is between the Samsung South Korea and Samsung Vietnam. Just between one company that most of the trade happens. That's where we're...
Subhashini, when you look at what's happening in the region, and Sri Lanka isn't a country deeply integrated with value chains, regional or global. It is also a fairly small economy, right? So sometimes even looking at what Vietnam has achieved may not be so relevant, I'm thinking right now for Sri Lanka because of our circumstances being small, and we've not moved as fast as Vietnam has done over the last couple of decades. So what does that leave a country like Sri Lanka with in terms of a strategy? A small country, not very well integrated to supply chains. How do you craft an FDI strategy out of these circumstances?
Yeah, I think most of the speakers referred to what I would say, but let me try to reframe it. So when you're a small economy like Sri Lanka, surrounded by so many larger economies with larger market size, lot more land, lot more resources, lot more labor and human resources, you always wonder, why should a foreign investor come to Sri Lanka? when there are opportunities elsewhere. So this is where I always say we can learn so much from smaller economies around the world. If you look at any of those indicators that Matisha showed, he of course compared Sri Lanka with the rest of the region. But if you look at any indicator, whether it's Global Competitiveness Index, Global Innovation Index, Governance Index, if you look at the top 10 to 20 countries, most of them are smaller countries and smaller than Sri Lanka. You take Singapore, you take Taiwan, you take Hong Kong, you take Switzerland, you take Denmark. So you just basically see many more smaller countries on those top. So this is a very good indication of the strategy of smaller countries. You need to be better than everyone else at something. I can't create more land. I can't match labor force, of India or Bangladesh or Pakistan. I can't create, of course market size can be overcome. I'll come to that. But then what these countries have realized is efficiency of doing business, cost of doing business inside the country and across the border. This is what makes these countries attractive. That's number one. And that is where Sri Lanka really, really needs to work hard. And it is encouraging to see what the minister said. But I was just, when I saw Mr. Jayaratna, I remembered in 2001 when I joined as a fresh graduate to Ceylon Chamber, the land bank that the minister was speaking. And the Ceylon Chamber in its budget proposals had for more than 10 years when I worked at the Ceylon Chamber that Sri Lanka needs to establish a land bank because you have very little land. And although we say 80% is owned by the government, it is not just single agency. It's so many agencies owning the land. So not knowing what land is available for investors, what can be allocated, whether for agriculture, whether for anything else, not having that knowledge is a significant problem because as a small country in allocating land. But it is encouraging that I know it's a very tough one to really get going, and it's encouraging that the government is taking it into consideration because those are some of the fundamentally important things that Sri Lanka needs to unlock, including single windows and everything else. The second one for Sri Lanka is when you're a small market, whatever said, and when an investor comes, they're not going to come into this 20 million market. They are looking at a larger market, their profitability depends on it, and this is where a lot of these smaller countries have a lot more trade agreements with the region and outside the region than even the larger ones. And this is how they tell the investor, look, don't come looking at my domestic market, but look at the access I give, seamless access I give to the entire region. And like Matisha said, for a supply chain investor, trade agreements are not only about tariffs. It's about trade facilitation, it's about digital connectivity, it's about a lot of other things that today's trade agreements look at. Then the third one is actually what everybody says, carving out your niche. So if you look at every small country, you have limited resources, you can't focus these on everything, right? So you just really invest on those comparative and competitive advantages you have. If you take Hong Kong, Singapore, Netherlands, it's a location. You really invest on location because it is one of the greatest assets you have. Then if you can look at even countries like Taiwan, Switzerland, they go for like high-tech, advanced industry, advanced pharma, all of that. So the reality is you need to really carve out your position so that when countries look at these multiple options they have, that you stand out, that you are becoming attractive to certain type of investors because you can't be attractive to every investor. When you are small, you need to really develop your niche.
So there's a bunch of questions coming through Slido. If you already haven't done so, but intend to, I would suggest you do so very soon, so that we can see how we can coordinate these questions. There's a couple here about how difficult it is or how challenging it is to invest into Sri Lanka's port city. And none of you in the panel represent Port City, but if I were to ask Bingu and maybe Subhashini also, Talal, if you want to quickly weigh in also, what can be done, given that we've done several changes to the underlying law? Are we there yet? And what needs to be done? Because investment approvals in competitive jurisdictions to Port City are quite straightforward and quick, we find.
So Port City also, sadly, we took 10 years to get the model right. I think we had a plan and that plan was changed, and now we have some plan. I think now we've seen some investments coming in solely because there's crisis in Middle East. I think a lot of the KPOs, BPOs see Port City as an opportunity. We have also seen a little bit of bleeding from the domestic companies moving into Port City. So we might lose taxes. That happens generally when you create a IFC. How easy to get the license? I don't think it's difficult for a BPO, KPO type business. For a hotel project linked to the marine life and all that, I don't know how much time that would take, because that will, have linkages to all these agencies. I believe that they'll have to go through those approvals as well. I don't think it's like a 7 days approval process for those projects. But for KPO, BPO is an easy one, which is a great outcome. We had to get it right, but we also called it Colombo International Financial Center at some point. Remember the CIFC? Now I think we've forgotten that. I think we had to wait for that. So for a financial center to emerge, you need to be investment grade. At the CCC rating, at this point, we should not be over-optimistic about global banks coming and setting up offices in Port City. We have to wait. We have to first get the local banks working there, separate authority, managing the banks, then list few funds. Family offices have started moving in slowly. So it will get there. But we need to get the sovereign rating up first for that kind of business. But I think initially it will be largely KPO, BPO type businesses and of course leisure.
Subhashin, any thoughts?
Unfortunately, I'm the Port City. No, I have very little knowledge.
I mean, I agree with Pingumal. The macro debt ratings, that would be the key thing, because when there is a sort of a debt overhang, that would always be the critical thing. But other than that, not too much into detail on that.
Okay. In the conversations you were having, Talal, with the private sector on what are potentially the impediments to FDI inflow into Sri Lanka, you said that factor market reforms, particularly land and labor, figured. Can you suggest to us exactly what was being desired in terms of reforms in land and labor? Has the agenda changed over the last 5-10 years, for instance, in the ambition of the reforms private sector wishes to see around land and labor factor markets, for instance?
So as far as land goes, these are land and labor are two key things people have spoken about. One thing is lack of land. As Subhashini said, 80% of the land is owned by the government, but that also doesn't mean the government owns all of the land. It does, but it's owned by different departments. Like, for example, the railway department owns it, the Mahaveli Development Authority, RDA, Urban Development Authority. So there are certain lands where you have to get agreements from various other things. So not part of any recent projects, but previously when I was talking to a Japanese firm here, so they said, just giving an example of this thing. So they had, for manufacturing, made an agreement with somebody on land that was supposed to be private land, signed an agreement, everything. Later they found that this person has not been telling the truth. It's actually government land. And they had to find out, and to get a lease agreement with the government, because this was owned by different departments, it is taking them 10 years. So that is one of the key things here. And of course, I think there has been studies on this, because most of the land doesn't have titles. So it's just deed of transfer. So disputes take 15 years in the courts. So these things, but the major level as far as FDI goes is lack of proper land, especially like for renewables. There's of course archaic laws. There's recently Of course, you can't cut more than 5 coconut trees, pine tree, jackfruit tree. So these are actual examples given by investors. So
Did labor also figure? If so, in what sense?
the labor.
Yeah.
Yes, labor is also an issue. For example, restructuring a firm. I mean, I think if you have more than 15 employees, you need to have the labor department sign off for restructuring. And some of these times it takes more than 7 months to get the labor department to come in, do the thing. So in the meantime, these companies have to continue to pay the people the wages as it has to, even though most of the time a company wants to restructure because it's in financial distress. So these are some of the key things. An example was somebody who tried to do this, and of course they couldn't. So instead of restructuring, they shut down the whole thing and left. Right. These are just to give you actual examples.
Sure. Subhashini, question for you potentially is that, the Ministry of Trade is working on a FTA framework. Will this result in Sri Lanka starting negotiations on bilateral and plurilateral trade agreements? What do you anticipate will happen now?
I think trade agreements, more than the economic benefits, requires political will in Sri Lanka. Because I think over the years we have, I always say South Asia in general, India is maybe changing now. South Asia always sees world as a threat, whereas Southeast Asia sees world as an opportunity. So to me, it's always why South Asia, Sri Lanka thinks of protecting is we are always scared. Instead of really looking at opportunities out there and thinking of like, how can we now make use of these opportunities, we would rather protect ourselves. So that is one problem that has prevented us from signing free trade agreements. But I want to say there is certain merit on those fears because of all the problems that you discussed in terms of business environment. So you're opening up to a country while you're domestic. I always say trade agreements in the good old days, now we need to think of them differently, was about reducing barriers in a foreign country. But if the barriers that is undermining your competitiveness is largely inside the country, at your own country's border, no matter how many barriers you remove in other countries, you're unable to export. In contrast, actually, if the other country has much better efficient systems and processes, your domestic industry will be hurt. So you're not going to succeed in exporting, and then pain of imports is going to be greater. So we need to understand, I'm not saying we need to wait for reforms to do trade agreements, and trade agreements can also support reforms, because that is what I think most of the European countries that joined Europe did. Actually, joining Europe really helped reform their economies and the institutions that helped them to be a lot more efficient. And when we study trade agreements frequently, now things may have changed. We used to refer to North America Free Trade Agreement as one of the success stories, how Mexico benefited a lot more and how developing countries can benefit more by joining. Of course, geopolitics is changing these narratives today, but the reality is we need to really be able to understand that reforming domestic economy and reducing barriers to trade and barriers to doing business is critically important to get support for trade agreements and also to benefit from trade agreements. So without that, it is very difficult to move trade agreements because the forces that are opposing it will be very strong, and a lot of governments that we've seen is really struggle to move forward. And when you do trade agreements, amidst a lot of opposition, what happens is these trade agreements become, not very comprehensive, deep agreements. While I agree on like the simple analysis we did on Thai FTA, for example, shows in terms of trade, actually, it's not sufficiently a deep agreement that leads to reforms, leads to better market access. So that is because you're now going to accommodate everybody's interests. And that is really reducing these agreements being very bold and very deep agreements. So to me, it's really political will, and also one way that you can get buy-in is through communication, but better reforms, and also this is the challenge Sri Lankan government faces. You need to have some way of cushioning the blow. And this is where your fiscal space becomes sometimes significantly problematic when we talk about labor laws or anything else. It's about when people lose employment. How are you going to support them, right? These active labor market policies, we don't have active labor market policies. How do we retrain them? How do we help them transition from one sector to the other sector? Especially when you have an aging population and when your labor force is also rather old, they're not young. So the transition is a lot more difficult. So we need to proactively think of additional policies that can support the industries, the people to absorb this blow, to be able to get support. I think, so it's about where you prioritize, where you spend your scarce public resources.
Martin, from your conversations and experience, you've been in Sri Lanka for a year, you said, what do you think are the key challenges or constraints faced by German or European companies in Sri Lanka, and if you are able to pinpoint some of these challenges that are perhaps potentially even unique, how does Sri Lanka get about addressing them?
Right. Thank you for that question. Core constraints by German firms have been mentioned already here. They are not specifically different from others. It's regulatory unpredictability, very lengthy approval processes, especially when it comes to importing some high-tech equipment here, medical equipment and other high-tech topics. That is like really a pain point for them. Lengthy processes, unpredictable approval topics there, and so what they need is certainly clear procedures and timelines, policy continuity, and also, of course, a legal certainty when it comes to actually trying to enforce their rights if they see if they believe they didn't get a right treatment. So this kind of topics are the most pain points which I hear from the companies who are active here in Sri Lanka. If you allow me to just sidestep also, I really liked your comments which you did earlier on in respect to Sri Lanka should simply, or smaller economies, not only looking at Sri Lanka, they simply need to find their competitive edge. No? It's not only related to a large economy, to a large scale, a lot of people living in that country. It's finding your niche. I totally agree on that. Look at Singapore, for example. They are a small, they are a big economy, but they have not that many people. So it's achievable. You just have to focus on that and look at Singapore as a example here in the region also. How did they achieve that? No? And one magic topic is, I think it applies also partly to Vietnam, partly to Thailand, is that they try to step by step open their economy for investors, liberalize conditions, try to welcome those multinationals who are the masters of trade and of exports here, and you do that by giving them certainty, giving them rights when they come here, enforceable rights. So this is something where Singapore certainly mastered the situation. But from my experience also, when you look at the development in Thailand and in Vietnam there, that is also basically how they achieved their development, how they have been getting so attractive also for foreign investors to get in. No?
The Deputy Minister is no longer here, but I'll ask you to collectively weigh in on what potentially a government that has maybe 3 years of its term left, what are the one or two realistic things they can fix in that term that would make Sri Lanka way more attractive than it is right now? I mean, Subhashini, you've added several provisos to, labor market reforms. We don't have the ban, we don't have the cushion to help those affected by these policies do it. Policy uncertainty is maybe not an easy thing to fix in a couple of years, but the government now wants your advice. What do you think are the one or two things that they can do that can potentially start bringing results in 2 or 3 years? You want to start, Bindu? You want to start? No, thank you.
Okay. So I think what government does today, I personally feel should be connected to what is happening in the world. So I have written and I have often said Sri Lanka's trade and investment has always been out of sync with global trends. And that is one of the key factors that we've missed those trends. So right now, supply chains, connectivity, India is a clear opportunity. And that opportunity will not wait. There are so many other countries competing with us for that opportunity. So really focusing on how can you really help unleash location potential. It can be through the right investments, digitalization. We are still lagging behind significantly from ports to customs to border agencies in digitalization. And also really, focusing on how can we make the connectivity work and start with low-hanging fruits, but build the foundation for the bigger ones. So it's really, really important focus on that. 3 years is, I think, the time we have if we want to make use of this opportunity.
Going in the same direction, I would say pick 3 topics which you could define as USPs for investors, why I need to come here, and promote those 3 items heavily in the regional context and via your embassies, via your trade missions, letting the world know in what 3 sectors Sri Lanka is really special.
I think, identifying the sectors would be critical without trying to do many things. And I think if you can give some constitutional protection, like there are countries that are done, basically protect the investment through the constitution. You can say you create national policies and you protect those national policies through a constitution, through the national constitution. So then the investors come, they know that those policies cannot change without 2/3 majority. So that's something that's sending a very strong message. It's long term as well, not for 3 years, it's beyond. I think the second piece, if you ask me, bringing down the number of approvals, I'll expand a little bit more. There's something called the Be Better Index. The ease of doing business is now kind of obsolete, it's going away. Be Better is the new thing. 50 countries are listed there. We should somehow get into it. Even as the 70th, 80th country, we should get into Be Better Index. Because that will give you direction in terms of where the country is, because that has a lot about how the government is responding to investors in terms of approvals, how easy to get services from the government, and all that has a lot with the Be Better Index. Third one is trade treaties. We spoke about is if we can get 2 treaties right, the India Treaty and RCEP. Those are 2 things that I would, if I have the capacity, I'll put my entire effort on getting those 2 treaties right. Because pointless us saying we are a great place, there are countries like that even in Africa, great investment policies, but you don't have big FDIs because you don't have market expanding propositions. You need to have the trade treaties to bring the big numbers in. Of course, for ports and logistics and tourism, BBO, KPO investments will come. But the big numbers will come through the treaties.
Talal, you want to begin?
Sure. I think 2 things, on the front of FDI and trade. Because just a fact, if you look at countries which have made a turn, whether it's the Southeast Asian countries after the Asian financial crisis, or India or China after 78, it's always the 2 things they changed was trade and investment. So on the investment side, I would say we need to look at what's going on in the world and position ourselves. Because one thing, of course, we are not ready for this. If you look at the UN statistics, about 20%, the largest amount of FDI is going into data centers. So are we looking at that front? I mean, of course, we're not ready. One thing you definitely need is energy. But are we having the right things for renewable energy? So those factors, of course, come in. And as Bingumal said, the approvals. You just need to reduce those. These don't require fiscal incentives, everything. It's sometimes just with the stroke of a pen, you can do this. The second thing is, of course, trade. On the trade front, if the government can, the liberalization would be the most important thing. As just to quote Dr. Indrajit Kumaraswamy, he was giving a talk and he was telling me, how Sri Lanka's imports, when it comes to about 40% are intermediate goods. But when we go to look at Sri Lanka's percentage of intermediate goods when it comes to exports, it's very much less. I think it's less than 10%. So which shows that we are not exporting into any supply chains of the world. As I mentioned, 70% of global trade is supply chains. But because we try to do many of the things inside, we do import from the supply chains. That is where the problem is. And if you look at a paper, on import substitution, study Argentina, most of these countries, this is where the problem is. Trade, you liberalize trade, most of the things get much cheaper. I'm talking about generally everything from food, vehicles. Of course, the question would be, we would be running out of reserves. But of course, the initial phase is going to be tough, but then the results come. And on the last point, I'll just say, one of my mentors is Dr. Montek Singh Aluwalia from India. So he always says the structural reforms are very unpopular, but when done, the problem is it takes 10 years for the results to show in. And most of the time, the people don't have patience. So you need proper communication.
Bingu, you talked about the potential to amend the constitution even to kind of solidify certain policy positions. Do you know of a country that has done that?
There are European countries. I think Bulgaria, I can't recall exactly. We've done some studies on this. There are many countries that have protected national policies through the constitution. So you don't deviate from that. And there are many legal procedures to protect the investors.
In conversations earlier, Bingu was mentioning, Subhashini, despite all the regional uncertainty or the Middle Eastern uncertainty, how the US economy is doing fantastically well. The most interesting companies, I think, right now in the world are coming out of the US. So many trillion-dollar companies that have emerged. Perhaps one of the reasons. Is there any opportunity at all that a country like Sri Lanka, not for us to attract large investments from these places, are there examples of countries, small countries, plugging in at high levels into supply chains, into technology in such a way?
So one is you generally make sure that your business environment is conducive enough for anyone to come. But there are stories of East Asian countries that target companies, right? Penang, Malaysia is seen as one place where the government proactively went to Intel and other companies and said, come and invest in our country and ask them, what do you want? So it's very company-centered. And sometimes when Thailand went to became the Detroit of Asia, right? So there are stories saying how they approached these global firms and then wanted to understand, if you're coming, what do you need? And really for the government to be very committed to provide those factors that they need to come and establish themselves. So that is another strategy that Southeast Asian countries seem to have adopted, and that has seem to have worked for them, but that really depends on the confidence that the government can give, that regardless of election cycles, that because these investments are not going to materialize within 4 years or 5 years of an election cycle. So that guarantees what is really required for the companies to have this confidence. Okay, I come today, I establish, then the government changes, and then I become the victim of an election cycle. and then some of these promises will not be kept by the next government. That's a challenge Sri Lanka has to overcome. And in East Asia, maybe there was much more political stability and the ability, like countries in Vietnam and others, because they had single parties or leaders ruling the country for a long time. So Sri Lanka needs to really manage that political process.
Perhaps this question also can go to you. At least you can start off. Do you feel the government is effectively communicating the key FDI sectors or opportunities in Sri Lanka? And this question refers to a few: mining, for instance, maybe data centers, with clear timelines and policy reforms that are in the horizon that relate to these sectors. Are we doing a good enough job?
I think especially one area is this rare earths and mineral. I think Sri Lanka really needs to get its mineral policy and mineral regulatory framework right, because that is a real opportunity for Sri Lanka that we are losing out. So definitely something for Sri Lanka to focus on given the demand for minerals.
Mingu or Talal, you want to weigh in on Sri Lanka's, are we being effective communicating the opportunities that exist in the country?
I think we can do a lot more better. We should do a better job on this one. I think we also getting the whole framework right. You just got the port city framework right. We are struggling on the minerals now. Energy went through a series of discussions. There are still few pieces to be fixed. Customs ordinance is under discussion as we speak. Public-private partnership is not out there yet. So all the stuff that Chathuranga spoke about, I mean, if you deliver all of those in the next 18 months, it'll be like nirvana. It'll be like very good.
It's also important that these be robust legislation and not heavily compromised, that they prove not to be effective. Is there in your understanding, is there danger that things will be watered down so far that they're not very effective? Is that a danger? Subhashini?
I think we are, so it's all about why are we reforming our laws. Right now we are reforming our laws largely looking at how to tackle corruption, how to tackle abuse of power, mismanagement. The fear is whether the laws will be overly concentrated on that, forgetting the need to manage that with efficiency for private sector. Efficiency, especially when it comes to procurement laws, this becomes really important to be able to manage. So already I think government procurement cycle is more than 1 year. So how can you really make sure that your regulations really have the right balance? Because when the motivation for reforms today is largely driven by how do we prevent these high levels of corruption and abuse.
Thank you. And I think we will close it there. I thank the panel. Let's give them a round of applause. I think they did a pretty good job. And that wraps up the discussion from us. Thank you.
To our chief guest, of course, he had to leave early, the Honorable Deputy Minister of Industry and Entrepreneurship Development, to Her Excellency Ambassador of the European Union, to our presenters, our panelists, our moderator, to all of you for your active participation. The conversation does not end here. We hope the perspectives shared this evening will continue to inform the policy choices, investment decisions, and reform priorities in Sri Lanka's growth trajectory in the years ahead. We invite you to join with us for refreshments, and thank you very much. Hope you have a pleasant evening. Thank you.